What if the real reason you feel restless is not because life is difficult, but because of one small habit you repeat every single day? A habit so normal that almost everyone does it. A habit that quietly enters your thoughts, shapes your emotions, and steals your peace without making any noise. Think about it for a moment. How many times today did your mind replay something someone said? How many times did a small situation stay in your thoughts longer than it needed to? How many times did your mind turn a simple moment into worry, frustration, or doubt? Most people believe peace disappears because of big problems, but Buddhist wisdom teaches something very different. Peace is rarely destroyed all at once. Instead, it slowly fades because of the small ways the mind reacts to everyday life. A small comment, a small mistake, a small delay, a small uncertainty about the future. Each moment seems harmless, but the mind grabs it, holds on to it, and turns it into something heavier than it really is. And without realizing it, people spend their entire day carrying thoughts that never needed to stay in their mind. This is why someone can have a comfortable life and still feel restless inside. The real disturbance is not always in the world. It is in the way the mind responds to the world. But once you understand this hidden habit, something powerful begins to change. You begin to see the patterns that once controlled your emotions. You begin to recognize the moments where your peace quietly slips away. And when you start seeing those moments clearly, you also discover something else. The peace you have been searching for was never truly gone. It was simply hidden beneath the habits of the restless mind. And once those habits become visible, the mind slowly learns how to return to calm again. Personalizing. Every situation makes life feel heavier than it is. One of the most common ways people quietly destroy their peace is by making everything about themselves. It happens so naturally that most people do not even notice they are doing it. A simple moment occurs, something small and ordinary, and almost instantly the mind begins building a story around it. That story usually places you at the center of the situation, even when the situation may have very little to do with you. For example, someone you know suddenly becomes quiet. They speak less than usual, or their tone feels different. The mind immediately starts searching for a reason. Instead of calmly observing the moment, the mind begins whispering questions. Did I do something wrong? Are they upset with me? Did I say something that bothered them? Within seconds, the mind creates a story that may not even be true. The same thing happens when someone disagrees with you. Instead of seeing it as two different opinions, the mind quickly turns the disagreement into something personal. It begins to feel like your intelligence is being challenged or your character is being judged. The conversation stops being about ideas and suddenly becomes about defending yourself. This pattern repeats in many small ways throughout the day. Someone replies late to your message, and the mind assumes they are ignoring you. A person seems distant, and the mind assumes they no longer care. A friend cancels a plan, and the mind assumes you are not important to them. But the truth is that much of what happens in life has nothing to do with you at all. People are often dealing with their own stress, their own worries, their own problems that you may never see. Someone might be quiet because they are tired. Someone might respond late because they are busy. Someone might seem distant because they are struggling with something in their own life. Yet the mind rarely pauses long enough to consider these possibilities. It jumps quickly to conclusions and places itself at the center of the situation. And each time it does this, it adds a little more emotional weight to your life. Buddhist wisdom explains that suffering often begins not with the event itself, but with the meaning the mind attaches to the event. The situation may be simple and harmless, but the mind's interpretation turns it into something heavy. Imagine carrying a bag that you keep filling with stones. Each stone represents a moment you took personally when it was not necessary. At first the bag feels light, but over time it becomes heavier and heavier. Eventually, you start feeling tired without fully understanding why. This is how many people live. They walk through the day collecting emotional stones. Every small misunderstanding, every imagined judgment, every uncertain situation becomes something they carry inside their mind. The strange part is that much of this weight was never meant to be carried in the first place. When you begin to understand this, something slowly changes in the way you experience life. You start pausing before jumping to conclusions. Instead of immediately assuming something is about you, you allow space for other possibilities. You begin to remind yourself that people are living their own stories, fighting their own battles, thinking their own thoughts. Not every silence is rejection. So not every disagreement is disrespect. Not every change in someone's behavior is a reflection of your worth. This understanding softens the mind. The moment you stop taking every situation personally, a quiet relief begins to appear. Conversations feel lighter, interactions feel less threatening. Your mind stops rushing to defend itself against things that were never attacks. You no longer feel responsible for every shift in someone else's mood or behavior. You stop carrying emotional burdens that do not belong to you. And slowly, something beautiful happens. The spaces that were once filled with worry and misunderstanding begin to fill with calm instead. The mind becomes more relaxed, more patient, and less reactive. Peace begins returning, not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because you are no longer turning every small moment into a personal struggle. Life becomes lighter when you realize that the world is not constantly judging you, testing you, or attacking you. Most of the time, it is simply moving forward. And when the mind stops inserting itself into every movement, peace naturally finds its way back. Fighting. Reality drains the mind of its strength. Many people lose their peace not because life is too hard, but because they keep fighting what has already happened. Something takes place, and even though the moment has already passed, the mind continues arguing with it. It keeps saying things like, this should not have happened, or why did this happen to me? The event may be over, but inside the mind, the struggle continues. This quiet fight with reality drains a huge amount of mental energy. The mind replays the same situation again and again, searching for a different ending that no longer exists. It imagines what could have been said, what should have been done, how things could have turned out differently. Hours pass, sometimes even days, yet the mind keeps returning to the same moment, as if thinking about it enough times might somehow change it. But the past cannot be argued with. It has already happened. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering often grows when the mind refuses to accept what is already real. When something unpleasant happens, the first reaction of the mind is resistance. It pushes against the situation. It complains internally. It wishes reality would suddenly change. Yet while the mind is resisting, life continues moving forward. Imagine trying to stand in the middle of a river while pushing the water backward with your hands. The harder you push, the more tired you become. But the river continues flowing anyway. Fighting the current does not stop the water. It only exhausts the person fighting it. The same thing happens inside the mind when it fights reality. A mistake happens and the mind refuses to let it go. A relationship changes, and the mind keeps wishing it could return to how things used to be. A plan fails, and the mind continues replaying the moment, asking endless questions about why it did not work out. But none of these questions can undo what has already happened. Instead of helping the situation, the mind becomes stuck in a loop of frustration and regret. This is why many people feel mentally exhausted even when they are not doing anything physically difficult. They are spending large amounts of emotional energy arguing with the past or resisting the present. Buddhist teachings remind us of a simple but powerful truth. Peace begins when the mind stops fighting what is already here. Acceptance does not mean that you like everything that happens. It does not mean you agree with every situation or approve of every outcome. Acceptance simply means you recognize reality as it is without pretending it should be something else. When the mind finally stops arguing with what has already occurred, something inside begins to relax. The tension that came from resisting the moment slowly dissolves. Instead of being trapped in the past, your energy returns to the present. You begin to see the situation more clearly. Your thoughts become calmer and your actions become wiser. Many people believe that acceptance is a form of weakness, but in truth, it requires strength. It takes courage to look at a situation honestly and say, "This is what happened." It takes maturity to stop blaming the past and start focusing on what can be done now. When the mind accepts reality, it becomes free to respond wisely. You can learn from mistakes instead of being trapped inside them. You can adjust your direction instead of staying stuck in frustration. You can move forward instead of carrying the weight of what cannot be changed. Slowly, the mind begins to understand that peace does not come from controlling everything in life. It comes from learning how to meet life as it is. And when you stop fighting reality, you discover that a great amount of strength returns to your mind. The energy that was once wasted on resistance becomes available for patience, clarity, and growth. In that moment, peace quietly begins to return. Not because life has become perfect, but because the mind is no longer exhausting itself trying to rewrite the past. The endless voice in the mind creates invisible noise. Many people believe they will finally feel peace when their life becomes quieter. They imagine that if they move to a calm place, avoid stress, or solve their problems, their mind will finally relax. But what most people discover is something surprising. Even when the outside world becomes quiet, the inside of the mind is still noisy. The mind keeps talking. It comments on everything that happens. It judges situations. It analyzes conversations, predicts the future, and revisits the past. Even during moments that should feel calm, the mind is still busy creating thoughts. A person may be sitting in silence, yet inside their mind there is a constant stream of sentences. Thoughts about what someone said earlier. Thoughts about something that might happen tomorrow. Thoughts about what they should have done differently. Thoughts about whether they are doing enough with their life. This endless thinking creates a kind of invisible noise. The strange thing is that many people have lived with this mental noise for so long that they think it is normal. They assume this constant thinking is necessary or even helpful. They believe that if they stop thinking so much, they might lose control or become careless. But Buddhist teachings explain that the mind often creates far more problems than it solves. Most thoughts are not useful decisions or creative ideas. They are simply habits of the mind repeating themselves. The mind remembers something from the past and begins replaying it. It imagines a possible future and begins worrying about it. One thought leads to another, and suddenly the mind is caught in a long chain of thinking that never actually improves the present moment. Imagine a clear lake early in the morning. When the water is calm, you can see clearly into it. The surface reflects the sky and everything around it. But if someone throws stones into the lake again and again, the water becomes disturbed. The surface ripples constantly, and clarity disappears. This is what constant thinking does to the mind. Every thought is like another stone dropped into the water. The surface of the mind never becomes still enough to see clearly. Buddhist wisdom teaches that thoughts themselves are not the enemy. Thinking is a natural part of being human. The problem appears when we believe every thought and follow every thought and allow every thought to control our emotions. The mind produces thousands of thoughts each day. Many of them appear automatically without invitation. But just because a thought appears does not mean it is important or true. Sometimes a thought is just a passing cloud. For example, a memory appears and the mind immediately begins analyzing it. A small worry appears and the mind begins imagining negative outcomes. A simple comment from someone reappears in the mind again and again, as if replaying it might change what happened. Without noticing it, a person can spend hours inside these mental stories. Yet, if you step back and observe carefully, you begin to notice something important. Thoughts come and go on their own. They appear, stay for a moment, and disappear if they are not constantly fed with attention. Buddhism teaches that peace begins when you learn to observe your thoughts instead of automatically believing them. Instead of chasing every thought that appears, you begin watching them with a little distance. You notice the thought arise, but you do not immediately jump into it. At first, this may feel strange, because most people are used to following their thoughts without question. But slowly, the mind begins to realize something powerful. You are not every thought that appears in your mind. Your thoughts are simply mental events passing through awareness. The moment you stop giving full attention to every thought, the noise inside the mind begins to fade. The endless commentary becomes softer. The mental space that was once crowded with analysis and worry begins to open. And in that open space, something very peaceful appears. A quiet clarity. It is the feeling of being fully present in the moment without constantly explaining, judging, or predicting everything around you. You can listen to someone speak without preparing your next response in your head. You can walk outside and actually notice the world around you. You can experience a moment without immediately turning it into a mental story. This kind of silence is not emptiness. It is not boredom. It is a deep sense of calm awareness. Many people search for peace by trying to change their environment, but the deeper change happens inside the mind. When the endless voice of commentary becomes quieter, the mind naturally becomes lighter. You begin realizing that peace was not something you had to create. It was something that was already there, hidden beneath the constant noise of unnecessary thinking. The desire for certainty creates constant anxiety. Many people live with a quiet tension inside their mind because they are always searching for certainty. They want to know exactly what will happen next. They want clear guarantees about their future, their relationships, their plans, so are in the direction of their life. The mind keeps asking questions like, will this work out? Will this person stay? Will my efforts succeed? What if something goes wrong? At first, this may seem normal. Wanting stability and clarity feels natural. But the problem begins when the mind refuses to feel calm unless it receives complete certainty. When peace becomes dependent on knowing the future, the mind begins living in constant anxiety. Life does not operate in perfect guarantees. These people change. Situations shift. Plans that once looked clear can suddenly move in a different direction. Even the things we trust the most can evolve with time. This uncertainty is part of the natural movement of life. Yet the mind often struggles to accept it. Instead of learning to live with uncertainty, the mind tries to eliminate it. It searches for reassurance everywhere. It replays conversations trying to read hidden meanings. It asks people again and again if everything is okay, as it analyzes situations repeatedly, hoping to discover some sign that the future will remain stable. But no matter how much the mind searches, the future always remains partially unknown. This constant search for certainty slowly turns into worry. The mind begins imagining negative possibilities. It tries to prepare for every outcome, every mistake, every possible disappointment. Instead of helping the mind feel safe, this habit creates a continuous feeling of tension. Buddhist teachings remind us that one of the fundamental truths of life is impermanence. Everything in existence moves and changes. Seasons change, emotions change, relationships evolve. Even our own thoughts and identities transform over time. This teaching is not meant to make people feel insecure. It is meant to help them stop demanding something from life that life cannot permanently provide. When the mind insists on perfect certainty, it is asking life to stop changing. But life was never designed to stay still. Imagine trying to hold water tightly in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more the water slips away. In the same way, The more tightly the mind tries to control the future, the more restless it becomes. Peace does not appear when everything becomes predictable. Peace appears when the mind becomes comfortable with the natural movement of life. When you begin to understand this deeply, something inside you relaxes. The mind no longer feels the need to solve the entire future today. It becomes more present in the moment that is actually happening right now. Instead of constantly asking, "What if something goes wrong?" the mind slowly learns to trust that it can handle whatever comes. This does not mean you stop planning or caring about the future. Planning is useful, and responsibility is important. But there is a difference between preparing wisely and worrying endlessly. Preparation uses calm thinking. Worry uses fear. When the mind stops demanding guarantees from life, a quiet freedom begins to appear. You no longer feel the need to control every outcome. You become more open to change and more flexible when life moves in unexpected directions. Situations that once created panic now feel more manageable. The mind understands that uncertainty is not always danger. Sometimes it is simply the natural unfolding of life. You begin realizing that stability does not come from knowing everything that will happen. True stability comes from trusting your ability to face whatever happens. And when the mind learns this, anxiety slowly loses its power. You stop trying to freeze life into a perfect plan. You begin walking with life instead of fighting against its movement. In that moment, peace begins to grow quietly within you, not because the future has become certain, but because your mind has become strong enough to live without needing certainty at every step. Small irritations become big disturbances when the mind feeds them. Many people believe that peace disappears because of major problems. They imagine that only big losses, serious conflicts, or difficult life events have the power to disturb the mind. But in reality, peace is often slowly worn away by something much smaller. It is quietly weakened by the many small irritations that the mind keeps feeding throughout the day. These irritations seem harmless at first. A small delay happens. A task takes longer than expected. Someone says something careless. A plan changes. The weather shifts. A person interrupts you at the wrong moment. None of these situations are truly serious, yet the mind reacts as if something important has gone wrong. Instead of letting the moment pass, the mind holds on to it. So it repeats the event again and again. It complains internally. It replays the conversation. It keeps thinking about how things should have happened differently. What began as a small inconvenience slowly grows into a larger emotional disturbance simply because the mind keeps feeding it attention. This is how irritation becomes a habit. Buddhist teachings explain that the mind grows in the direction of whatever it repeatedly focuses on. If the mind keeps focusing on what is annoying, unfair, or uncomfortable, it slowly becomes trained to notice these things more and more. Imagine planting seeds in a garden. If you water the seeds every day, they grow. But if you ignore them, they eventually fade away. The same process happens inside the mind. Every time you give strong attention to irritation, you are watering the seed of frustration. Over time, the mind becomes very skilled at finding things to be annoyed about. And it begins scanning the environment for what is wrong rather than appreciating what is calm or ordinary. This is why some people feel disturbed even during peaceful days. Nothing major has gone wrong, yet their mind keeps collecting small frustrations throughout the day. A slow internet connection becomes a source of anger. A minor misunderstanding becomes a long mental argument. A small mistake becomes something they replay again and again. By the end of the day, the mind feels heavy and tense, even though none of the events were truly serious. Buddhist wisdom teaches that peace grows when the mind learns how to let small disturbances remain small. Not every irritation deserves your emotional energy. Many moments in life are simply passing events. They appear, stay briefly, and disappear. But when the mind clings to them, it stretches those moments far beyond their natural life. Here's a small inconvenience that lasted 30 seconds can remain in the mind for hours simply because the mind refuses to release it. When you begin observing this pattern, you start seeing how unnecessary much of this suffering really is. You notice that the moment itself was small, but the mind's reaction made it larger. You realize that irritation often continues not because the situation is still happening, but because the mind keeps replaying it. This awareness gives you a new kind of freedom. You begin asking yourself a simple question: is this moment truly worth carrying in my mind? Very often, the honest answer is no. When the mind learns to release small irritations quickly, life begins to feel much lighter. Delays remain delays instead of becoming anger. Mistakes remain small mistakes instead of turning into long regrets. Careless comments remain brief moments instead of becoming emotional wounds. This does not mean you become passive or careless about important issues. It simply means you stop wasting your energy on moments that do not deserve such attention. Over time, something beautiful begins to happen. The mind becomes calmer, more patient, and less reactive. Situations that once triggered frustration now pass by more easily. You start noticing how peaceful life can feel when the mind is not constantly magnifying every small inconvenience. Peace is not only created by handling large challenges wisely. Very often, it is protected by refusing to give small irritations the power to control your inner world. And when the mind stops feeding frustration again and again, calmness slowly becomes its new habit. Endless wanting prevents the mind from resting. Another quiet habit that slowly steals a peace from the mind is the habit of endless wanting. The mind is always reaching forward, always searching for something more, something better, something different from what is already here. It may want more success, more recognition, more comfort, more control over how life unfolds. Sometimes the desire is small and simple, like wishing the day would go more smoothly or hoping someone would treat you a certain way. Other times, the desire is larger, like wanting a better position in life, a better opportunity, or a different future. At first, desire can seem helpful. It can push people to improve their lives, work hard, and grow. But the problem begins when the mind starts believing that peace will only arrive after the next desire is fulfilled. The mind quietly tells itself, "I will finally feel calm when this happens. I will feel satisfied when I achieve that. I will relax when this problem disappears." Because of this belief, the mind keeps postponing peace. Instead of appreciating the moment that already exists, it keeps leaning into the future, chasing the next condition that promises happiness. And when that condition finally arrives, something unexpected happens. For a short time, the mind feels satisfied. But soon after, another desire appears. The mind begins thinking about the next improvement, the next goal, the next change that might bring even greater happiness. The cycle continues again and again. This is why many people achieve the things they once wanted, but still feel restless inside. They reach their goals, yet the mind does not remain satisfied for long. It simply finds something new to pursue. Buddhist teachings speak deeply about this pattern. They explain that craving is one of the main sources of suffering. The problem is not that people wish to grow or improve their lives. The problem is that the mind begins depending on future outcomes in order to feel complete. When happiness becomes dependent on something that has not happened yet, the present moment begins to feel incomplete. Even when life is good, the mind feels as if something is missing. This constant reaching creates a quiet restlessness. Imagine walking through a beautiful garden but refusing to stop and enjoy the flowers because you are always searching for an even better view somewhere ahead. The beauty around you is real, yet the mind is too focused on the next possibility to appreciate it. In the same way, the mind often overlooks the simple goodness that already exists in life. A peaceful moment, a meaningful conversation, is a quiet evening, the comfort of being alive in the present moment. These experiences are often ignored because the mind is busy thinking about what should happen next. Over time, this habit of endless wanting keeps the mind in a state of dissatisfaction. Even success begins to feel temporary because the mind is already moving toward the next desire. Buddhist wisdom teaches that peace begins when the mind learns to see desire clearly, instead of automatically obeying it. When a desire appears, you do not have to immediately chase it. You can observe it calmly. You can notice how the mind starts leaning toward the future. You can see how it promises happiness once something new is obtained. This simple awareness begins to weaken the power of craving. You start realizing that not every desire needs to control your attention. Some desires are useful, but many are simply habits of the mind trying to escape the present moment. As this understanding deepens, something gentle begins to grow inside you. Contentment. Contentment does not mean giving up on life or refusing to grow. It simply means that your peace is no longer dependent on getting more. You can still work toward goals, improve your life, and make meaningful progress. But your sense of calm does not disappear while you are on the journey. The present moment stops feeling like a temporary waiting room for the future. It becomes a place where peace can exist right now. And when the mind learns this lesson, a great amount of restlessness begins to fade. The constant hunger for something more slowly quiets down. You begin to experience a simple but powerful realization. The peace you were searching for in the future was always available in the present moment, once the mind stopped chasing endlessly after the next desire. Depending on other people's approval makes peace fragile. Another habit that quietly destroys peace is the habit of building your sense of worth on other people's opinions. Many people do not notice how much of their inner stability depends on how others react to them. Their mood rises when they are praised, and it falls when they are criticized. A kind word can make them feel confident for hours, while a careless comment can disturb their mind for the entire day. At first, this may seem normal. Human beings naturally care about connection and acceptance. We all want to feel respected and valued. But the problem begins when your sense of self becomes completely dependent on how other people see you. When someone appreciates your work, the mind feels safe and proud. But when someone questions you, ignores you, or disagrees with you, the mind suddenly begins to doubt itself. It starts asking painful questions. Am I good enough? Did I do something wrong? Why don't they see my effort? In this way, your inner peace becomes something that other people control without even knowing it. Imagine giving someone else the remote control to your emotions. When they press one button, you feel confident. When they press another button, you feel insecure. If they approve of you, your mind relaxes. If they criticize you, your mind becomes disturbed. Living this way makes peace extremely fragile. This is because people's opinions are constantly changing. Someone who praises you today may criticize you tomorrow. Someone who understands you today may misunderstand you later. Human beings are influenced by their moods, their experiences, their beliefs, and their own struggles. Because of this, their opinions are rarely stable. If your peace depends entirely on those opinions, your inner world will always feel unstable. Your mind will constantly watch how others respond to you. You will begin adjusting your behavior, your words, and even your identity just to maintain approval. Slowly, life begins to feel like a performance. Instead of living honestly, the mind becomes focused on managing impressions. You start wondering how people see you, whether they respect you, whether they admire you enough. The fear of losing approval becomes stronger than the desire to understand yourself. Buddhist teachings remind us that real stability cannot come from something that constantly changes. If your worth depends on praise, then criticism will feel like a threat. If your identity depends on admiration, then rejection will feel like a collapse. But when your understanding of yourself grows from within, something powerful happens. You begin to see that opinions are simply opinions. They are reflections of someone else's perspective, not final judgments about who you are. Some opinions may be helpful. They may show you where you can grow or improve. But many opinions are simply expressions of someone else's preferences, emotions, or misunderstandings. When you begin to see this clearly, the mind stops reacting so strongly. Praise becomes pleasant, but it no longer controls your sense of worth. Criticism may still sting for a moment, but it no longer has the power to shake your entire identity. You become more balanced. You are able to listen, learn, and grow without feeling as if your value is constantly being measured by others. You stop trying to be everything for everyone. You begin focusing more on living with honesty, kindness, and clarity rather than constantly chasing approval. This change brings a deep sense of freedom. You can express your thoughts without being paralyzed by the fear of disagreement. You can accept that not everyone will understand you, and that is okay. You can respect other people's views without allowing those views to define your entire identity. Life becomes lighter because you are no longer carrying the exhausting responsibility of maintaining everyone's approval. When the mind stops depending on praise and fearing criticism, a deeper form of stability appears. Your peace begins to come from your own understanding rather than from the shifting reactions of the world around you. And when that happens, something very calm and powerful grows inside. You are still connected to others. You still care about relationships and respect. But your inner peace no longer rises and falls with every opinion that passes through the room. It becomes something steady, something rooted inside you rather than something borrowed from the outside world. Awareness is the door back to peace. The turning point begins when a person starts seeing their own mind clearly. Most of the habits that disturb peace operate quietly and automatically. They happen so quickly that we rarely notice them in the moment. The mind reacts, forms a story, creates emotion, and moves forward before we even realize what has happened. For example, a small irritation appears and almost instantly the mind begins feeding it with more thoughts. Someone says something unexpected, and the mind quickly builds a personal interpretation. A worry about the future appears, and the mind immediately begins imagining possible problems. These reactions often feel natural because they have been repeated for many years. They have become habits of thinking. But Buddhist wisdom teaches that the first step toward freedom is simple awareness. When you begin observing your mind, something very important changes. Instead of being completely carried away by each reaction, you start noticing it as it happens. At first, this may seem like a small shift, but it is actually very powerful. Imagine standing beside a busy road. Cars are passing by quickly in both directions. If you stand in the middle of the road, you are constantly pushed and pulled by the traffic. But if you step to the side and watch from a safe distance, you can observe the movement without being hit by it. Thoughts are similar. When you are completely inside every thought, it controls your emotions and actions. But when you step back and observe the thought, and it becomes something you can see clearly instead of something that controls you, you begin to notice how quickly the mind creates stories. A small situation appears, and the mind immediately tries to explain it, judge it, or react to it. But when awareness is present, you can see the beginning of that reaction. You notice the irritation forming before it turns into anger. You notice the worry appearing before it turns into anxiety. You notice the desire pulling your attention before it becomes restless craving. This small moment of awareness creates space. And inside that space, you suddenly have a choice. Instead of reacting automatically, you can pause. You can breathe for a moment and watch what the mind is doing. You can ask yourself whether the thought you are following is truly helpful or whether it is simply another habit repeating itself. Often, just seeing the habit clearly is enough to weaken its power. For example, When you notice that the mind is replaying the same negative thought again and again, you begin to realize that the thought is not actually solving anything. It is simply repeating itself out of habit. The moment you see this clearly, the mind becomes less interested in feeding that thought. The same happens with irritation. When you become aware that the mind is magnifying a small inconvenience, the reaction often loses its strength. The situation remains small instead of growing into something larger. Buddhist practice is built on this simple but powerful idea. Awareness changes the relationship you have with your thoughts and emotions. Instead of being controlled by them, you begin observing them. Instead of believing every story the mind creates, you begin questioning it. Instead of reacting instantly, you begin responding with patience and clarity. Over time, this awareness becomes stronger and more natural. So you begin catching the mind earlier in the process, before the reaction becomes too strong. The emotional storms that once lasted for hours may now fade within minutes. The mind becomes lighter because it is no longer carrying every passing thought as if it were important. Gradually, the habits that once stole your peace begin losing their influence. The mind stops grabbing every small disturbance. It becomes calmer, more steady, and more clear. You begin to experience life with more presence. Conversations feel more real. Moments of quiet become more enjoyable. The mind is no longer constantly racing between the past and the future. And in that calm awareness, something beautiful becomes visible. Peace was never truly gone. It was simply hidden beneath the noise of automatic reactions and restless thinking. Once the mind learns to observe itself with patience and honesty, that noise slowly fades. What remains is a quiet sense of balance, a steady presence that does not depend on everything going perfectly. Life will still move. Situations will still change. Difficult moments will still appear. But the mind is no longer thrown around by every small wave. It learns how to remain steady within the movement of life. And this steady awareness becomes the doorway through which lasting peace begins to return. Peace is not something far away waiting for you at the end of life. It is not hidden in a perfect future, and it is not reserved only for people whose lives are free from problems. Peace is something much closer than most people realize. It lives inside the way your mind meets each moment. Most people spend their lives searching outside for calm, while quietly allowing their mind to react to everything that appears. Every opinion, every inconvenience, every passing thought becomes something the mind grabs and carries. And slowly, without noticing it, and they lose the lightness that once existed within them. But the moment you begin seeing these habits clearly, something important begins to change. You start noticing when the mind is taking things personally. You begin catching the moment when the mind starts resisting reality. You see how easily small irritations try to grow inside your thoughts. You recognize when the mind begins chasing certainty, approval, or the next desire. And in that moment of seeing, a quiet freedom appears. Because awareness gives you the ability to pause. Instead of reacting immediately, you begin observing. Instead of feeding every thought, you begin letting some of them pass. Instead of clinging to every disturbance, you allow many moments to simply move through your life. This is the beginning of real inner strength. Life will still bring change. People will still misunderstand you. Plans will still shift in ways you did not expect. The world will continue moving in ways you cannot control. But your mind no longer has to be carried away by every movement. When awareness becomes stronger than habit, the mind becomes steadier. The noise begins to fade. The constant struggle begins to loosen its grip. And slowly, something very simple returns. A quiet mind, a lighter heart, a peaceful presence that does not depend on life being perfect. You realize that peace was never missing from your life. It was simply waiting beneath the noise of unnecessary reactions. And the more clearly you see the mind, the more easily that peace begins to reveal itself again.